We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian and this channel is all about music and art, and in this series of videos we've been looking at what is happening regarding the music streaming in the UK. The UK Government's Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the ways that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee were going to inquire into the impact of the streaming on the future of the music industry. This article stated that the inquiry would consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. Now, I knew that some high-profile musicians and music industry types were going to be giving evidence to the committee. And the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November 2020. And it continued through December into January and February of this year, 2021. Now, these were long meetings lasting over 3 hours. So what I've done is I've edited them all down into shorter videos, and you can find a link to all the previous meeting videos in the description down below. I've also created an introduction for each section, and if you want to, you can skip straight past those bits to the questions by clicking on the timestamps. Again, all of this stuff is in the description. The Digital Cultural, Media and Sports Committee held another oral evidence session on the 22nd of March 2021, and this time the committee were looking inwards into their ministerial session, asking evidence from 2 ministers and official experts, and I'll let the chair Julian Knight introduce the guests in a moment. And it's just worth mentioning that there was an open letter written to Boris Johnson last week from 156 musicians, including Paul McCartney, Gary Barlow, Kate Bush and other high-profile musos. Now, the letter stated that for too long, streaming platforms, record labels and other internet giants have exploited performers and creators without rewarding them fairly. We must put the value of music back where it belongs, in the hands of the music makers. And as the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Committee are now writing their final report, we can only hope that something good will come out of this. But I'll put a link to the full letter in the description down below if you wanted to read it. All of these sessions were chaired by Julian Knight, and the complete list of committee members and relevant links are in the description down below. This recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament Terms and Conditions, which states that I cannot alter the video or audio of the recording in any way. I can't use the material for satire or use it on a website or social media platform that promotes, encourages or facilitates illegal activity or encourages hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 3 from the 22nd of March 2021 into the economics of music streaming.
Thank you. I just unfroze at the very right minute there. Thank you, Kevin. Clive Efford.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Dinenage, can I just ask, what's the overall view of DCMS to this issue? Is the general view that artists are sufficiently remunerated through the streaming payments that they receive? Or is there concern that particularly the big 3 dominate and take too big a share of the pie? What's the prevailing view within DCMS?
I think the prevailing view would be very mixed, Clive. I think we are aware that there are very varied views across the music sector as to with regard to this issue. We feel very strongly that this has been brought into sharp focus by the crazy times that we're living through with COVID-19 and how it's removed the opportunity for live performances. And so streaming has become really brought into focus. And, you know, it's clearly very complex. There are very different views from across the music ecosystem, and that's why evidence provided in forums like this is really, really important. We know that consumer habits are evolving so quickly as we've entered the digital age, and streaming platforms have become now really, really so mainstream in a way that even 10 years ago had never been thought of, and they're clearly going to be a very significant part of the music sector's future. So we've got to ensure that it's sustainable and supported to benefit all. What I would say is that this is going to sound weird, but what I would say is that streaming has enabled more artists to become successful, but at the same time, more unsuccessful. So if I can just explain what I mean by that, what seems to be a completely weird thing to say, but we know that so many more unknown artists are able to get their music out there than they were under, say, like radio, for example, where they were relying on geniuses like John Peel to break into the music industry. So streaming allows, I think Spotify say that they get 60,000 new tracks a day uploaded. So if you're a new artist trying to break into the market, there are some real opportunities there. But equally, for some established artists for whom actually their genre does not particularly lend itself to streaming as a way of digesting their music, it's not so successful. And also, the more artists that they're sort of sharing a smaller piece of cake each, if you see what I mean. So in that way it's less successful. So it's a really, really tricky situation, and we're trying to work our way through it in the same way that the committee is, which is why this is so valuable.
So you say that the cake's got bigger, but there's more people taking a piece of the cake, so it's shared around a bit less for all. And
in addition to that, things like piracy, which in the early 2000s were a massive issue for the sector. Streaming has really helped address that. So in a number of the cake's got bigger, the number of people having the cake's got bigger. It's, there's cake all over the place, and what we've got to do is try and figure it out. Yeah,
well, before you become the Marie Antoinette of streaming, can I just ask, have you been following the evidence that we've had from artists themselves and people who represent artists? Because they've said very loud and clear that the distribution of the cake is not fair. It's weighted in favour of the big three companies. And we've had successful artists. I mean, we've had Nadine Shah and Guy Garvey, both of them talking to us about successful artists of their stature being unable to pay their rent. What does that bode for the future of the creativity in this field if we have relatively successful artists who are struggling?
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And it's very difficult because, as I said, there are certain genres of music that really lend themselves to streaming. So the sort of stuff that my kids love, so you kind of R&B, rap, bedroom pop, all that sort of types of genres in music. Streaming is crazy. I mean, your top artists, the likes of Dua Lipa and Ed Sheeran and what have you, are doing, do billions and billions of streams. There are certain genres of music, so folk, more indie music, the type of music on Six Music, obviously classical music, where there are less, and therefore it's much harder for those artists. Someone like Nadine Shah, who is a brilliant artist, she has quite a small but a very loyal following, so she does really well in the live performance market, but less well in streaming. And and that's the difficulty. It very much depends on the genre, and you have to try and break that out of the more wider sense of unfairness that some artists are feeling. So that's why this review has been valuable, because trying to rattle through all those issues and break it down and really come to the nub of the question is problematic.
Well, does the department? Sorry, Amanda. The Minister, did you want to come in?
I'm happy to come in when you've asked your next question, Clive.
Okay, all right. So I just want to ask the DCMS's attitude towards the domination of the big three in this field. I mean, they not only have 75% of the market, but they also own a stake in Spotify and other streaming platforms. So is the department concerned that domination is too great? And do you think that that's something that should be looked into?
Well, I think it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, there is a Competitions and Markets Authority, and they're operationally independent from government. So there is a real sort of pro-competition regime that can be used if anybody feels that that is the case. But as I said earlier to Damien Hines, we're also in a situation where there are a lot more ways of people getting their music to market, you know, whether that's actually people uploading their own music to Spotify themselves, whether it's them effectively being their own record company and doing all the A&R and all the other stuff that goes alongside it, you know. So it's not the same as it was back in the day, where you had to be signed to a big label in order to get your physical CDs onto the shelves of HMV. It's a different world.
But what we're hearing though is that you do have to be on one of those big record labels because they dominate the streaming because of their intricate involvement in, you know, organisations, bodies like Spotify.
Well, all I would say to you, Clive, is Stormzy wasn't.
Well, I mean, I'm sure we can all give examples that you know prove the rule. But I mean, what we're hearing quite clearly from these artists is that they could survive and they would thrive better if the cake were divided fairly. And there is not enough recognition for the creativity in this for the artists in the way that the cake is divided. And I mean, I just really wanted to know is whether you feel that the domination of those big companies is a barrier to that being changed.
Well, I think I've already laid out, you know, that I think that if this is something the committee feels is the case, then there is the Competitions and Markets Authority there to look into it. But there are so many more ways to market. I mean, I already mentioned AJ Tracey. You know, he's a top 100 UK artist who's entirely self-represented. You know, he's his own record label and has made a huge success of it. That wasn't even possible 10 years ago. Even that wasn't even possible. You know, so the whole world is evolving in this space, and so it's a lot more complicated than just there being three large dominant players.
Could I ask Mr. Solloway, do you think that there's too much domination by the big three?
So thank you very much for inviting me in. And clearly, Caroline's field on this. However, I think there are some things that do need to be mentioned and acknowledged, which is why I welcome this inquiry so much. And I think when Caroline was talking about cake, I think the cake has changed as well. And I think that is something that we really need to acknowledge, because the way everything is working these days, I'm getting really hungry as well on this. Sorry, Chair. But I think the cake has changed. But I also think there's some things, just some points worthwhile remembering. Contracts, that is really an important part of all of this. And I think, you know, that is something that I don't know whether we will talk about it, but it's something that is outside of our control, the way the contracts are defined and designed. But that is something that we cannot alter. However, as well as this, we do know that one of the significant factors, and it's a fact at the moment with COVID, is that live performances, which really are the bread and butter of a lot of these bands, just are not happening. And I give you an example, not a particular example, but if we just think about a live performance, but if we think about me using Spotify, and I was looking today at, I don't know whether anybody's heard Jerusalem. Well, it was a dance that was really popular last year that went viral. I mean, it went absolutely all over the place. And I've been virtually learning to dance it with my granddaughter. But I would suggest that when we can get back to live performances, it's this kind of thing that's really going to bring all of this alive. However, that's not helpful, Clive, in terms of where we are at the moment. The fact is, We do know that we have a COVID situation. We do know that contracts have to be negotiated and they happen outside of our control. But one thing I'm really keen to hear from the inquiry is the suggestions of the way forward. And is there something to be looked at? And I guess that is where your conclusions will be incredibly helpful.
Okay, can I just ask, you were talking about the copyright earlier on. So UK artists are asking for the same ability as their US counterparts to recapture their copyright from labels after 35 years. Is that a right that should be introduced here?
Well, there's I will defer to Tim on this because obviously this is his level of expertise. But in terms of the copyrights, we have a very robust copyright system that as soon as something is produced, you will know it has a copyright attached. So I'm not sure whether you're talking about the copyright or whether you're talking about the label contract on that before I hand over to Tim.
No, it's copyright. But Tim.
I think, in this space, a lot of this is down to contracts and the way that people, the contracts they sign and what's associated with it in terms of the term of copyright that they're giving up to, whether it be the record label or not. I think, again, this needs to be looked at in terms of if you introduce a term like that, what is the impact? Because it then introduces a lack of certainty sometimes, or greater certainty for the rights holder, but does that introduce lack of certainty for labels and others, and they build that into their calculation around future investment and what they're willing to do in terms of new artists. So it would change the market, and it's something that would need to be looked at very carefully and look at the evidence. I know the EU looked at it as part of some of the digital single market, and there is an element around that, but that's only for rights where the rights have not been commercially exploited. And that would be in very few situations and certainly wouldn't link into the streaming scenario.
So you say it should be looked at, or it has been looked at and decided it's too complicated to change, or what? I mean, we're hearing a lot of, obfuscation here saying it's all too complicated. What's the answer?
The answer is, there was a specific bit looked at as part of the digital single market discussions in Europe that we were part of. And then that was actually one of the rights that I think Minister Dinenage referred to earlier that was introduced very late on in the discussions and was not fully impact assessed. So it would need to be looked at very carefully and impact assessed if that is something that we looked at. But at the moment, that's not something that we're looking at. Okay, I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to slightly move on, and delightful to have two lady ministers in front of us. So I'm going to be ever so gentle, but have a completely different view on things. OK, so I'm quite interested in finding out your two departments. Have the departments analysed the impact of sites like YouTube with safe harbour on music industry revenues? And so what were your conclusions, please? Don't mind who goes first. Don't mind if you say haven't looked at it.
Sorry, I was struggling to. Go on, no, you go, Amanda. Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself then for a minute. You go, Amanda.
Sorry, I was going to say, Heather, lovely to see you. So in terms of that, I don't have that data. So just I haven't got that data available to me, but I don't know whether Caroline has.
No, I don't have it either. All I would say is that with regard to the whole issue of safe harbours, I know that the law does require platforms to remove copyright infringing content as fast as possible once they know that content is there, and that there are a number of platforms, YouTube you mentioned, that have invested very heavily in the technology to really try and cut down on that infringing content upload onto its services, but obviously we're really keen to ensure that is the case, and that's something that continues to happen because clearly that is something that's of enormous concern.
Okie dokie, thanks for that.
Yeah.
So I'll ask my second question then. So bearing in mind those safe harbour provisions, has that come up in any discussions again with both departments? Regarding the US-UK trade deal, either within government or counterparts or lobbying groups in America, please?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. All I would say is that the UK's IP enforcement regime is absolutely world leading, and we need to ensure that any future trade agreements don't negatively impact on the standards that we have here in the UK.
And if I may add just a couple of things to that, and then Tim can sort of sweep up if I have missed anything. But my understanding is there has been some negotiations, Heather, but I believe that they are confidential negotiations, but that Tim may well come in and just clarify that. And in terms of making sure that the platforms have processes in place, we have that, but in terms of data, again, Tim may well have a little bit more data on that too.
Tim.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. What you say is absolutely correct. Obviously, the trade negotiations are confidential, but as Minister Dinenage has said, the UK does have a great IP enforcement regime, and we're looking to make sure that nothing within the trade space reduces that. And in fact, that we're looking to increase standards across the world as part of our trade agenda.
Really interesting. Folks, thank you so much. Chairman, back to you.
Thank you. Just to come in for one quick follow-up there. Probably Minister Dinenage, actually, if that's okay. We just talked about safe harbour. Isn't a position really of YouTube effectively that they say to content providers and music providers that we've got safe harbour, we can pay you what we want to pay you, and there's nothing you can do about it if you don't like it. It's like it'll lump it. They've done that with Time Warner in the past. Is that really a fair and equitable position to be in?
I don't know. You'd have to ask YouTube what their attitude to this is. I don't know that they've appeared on this. They
have, and they have, and they wouldn't. Having complained about the music industry's lack of transparency, they then refused to say exactly what they were paying for streams. The real issue is that YouTube, which is actually the biggest streaming service in the world, we forget that. There's been a lot of mention of Spotify here, but YouTube are the biggest in the world. Because of safe harbour, they could do what they want. And anyone who tries to go against that, basically, they can just go, well, tough. We'll just do it anyway. They're our users. We've got safe harbour. And you will therefore just have what we give you as a means by which to sort of keep you happy. Is that really equitable in any way? Is that a good relationship to have in global business?
I don't really want to get drawn into YouTube's global business, but the only thing I would say is that the committee will be aware that we have announced that we're establishing a digital markets unit within the CMA. Whether that will have any opportunity, obviously, a CMA is independently operational from government, and they decide what they look at. But whether they would have the opportunity to look at YouTube, it would obviously be a matter for them.
I'd hope that the digital markets unit would have the ability to look at YouTube, because otherwise it's pointless, isn't it?
And they're an offspring of Google, aren't they? So one would think that that would make them sufficiently large.
Yes, yeah, absolutely enormous. But because the realities are that, of course, the likes of Google and Facebook, they've already largely killed newspapers in many parts of the world. And the truth of the matter is that YouTube, Google, yes, to a lesser extent Spotify, if you like, are in the process potentially killing radio. Our next question comes from Giles Watling. Giles?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to come to you, Caroline, if I may, and thank you, everybody, for turning up today. It's really fascinating stuff, and it's good to hear the ministerial side of things. I just want to talk about exports. The BPI said that the record label's income in 2019 was up to 1.1 billion, which was the fourth consecutive year of growth, boosting turnover by 21%. That represented nearly 3% uplift in the profit margin. Now, the BPI called for increased taxpayer funding, despite all that, through the Music Export Growth Scheme, affectionately known as MEGS. And that's operated by the BPI and funded by the Department for International Trade. Now, how's it doing? How is MEGS doing? How is the Music Export Growth? How would you evaluate that success?
I think the Music Export Growth Scheme's been really good. It's awarded over £4 million to 280 British music projects so far, and the BPI has literally only just recently announced a further 10 independent artists will share the next tranche of £100,000 in the latest round of funding. That includes some of artists, including the Mercury Prize shortlisted at Jungle, and a Yorkshire indie band called Working Men's Club, who are reflecting the diversity of British music. And we're working with the industry on continued support for that, because we think it's really, really good. We know that, there's some really, household names like Catfish and the Bottlemen, and indeed the London Symphony Orchestra have received MEGS funding. So it's actually had a lot of success over recent years. It's DIT money, but we'll hope to have an announcement on that shortly.
Okay, do we have any quantifiable figures? I mean, do we know how it's increased the export trade and what it's bringing in?
We estimate that, hold on, we may have to drop you a note on that. I'm just trying to rack my brains to remember the details. But
that's fine. I'm sorry, it's a bit of an unfair question, but it would be very good of you if you could supply us with that information so we can see how it's working in terms of fiscal. Robert's put his hand up. He might have an answer.
Robert knows.
So the data that I have at the moment is that the scheme has generated over £46.5 million in music exports for the UK, and a return of £12 for every £1 invested for actual or estimated business won.
Thank you. I wish I could come up.
That was the figures I couldn't remember. The one thing I do remember though is 95% of MEGS grants have gone to independent artists, those who aren't signed to major record labels.
That's really good to hear. So have you considered the BPI's call for to support the sector by doubling the contribution to MEGS?
Well, as I say, MEGS is a fund that comes out of the DIT, but has been funded by the Treasury. So it's we're all putting our heads together to see how we can continue to support it. But as you've heard, there's been some really great examples of success from it. But more broadly than that, as you know, Giles, we're working on a continued export support through the touring working group. I'm really keen on the idea of an export office. We're looking very closely at how we can support that, which obviously would really help get our great music all around the world.
Well, of course, and I think we'd all support that. But going back to the figures I mentioned earlier about the income that the record labels had up until 2019 before the coronavirus outbreak, is there a way that the government, do you think, could compel the industry to similarly to contribute to the scheme from their own revenue, so that it's not just the DTI funding?
I'd be very happy if this was something that the music industry would come together to support, because the one we were talking about cake earlier, but the one way that we're going to make that cake bigger is by exporting our music wider. We know that that the creative industries in general, but our music industry in particular, is just a great British calling card. It's something that we're world renowned for. No, I don't even need to tell you guys that. And so it stands to reason that it's something that we can do more of, and it's great for the UK economy, but it's also great for getting our artists out there around the world.
But to get the record labels themselves to contribute to the scheme.
I would love to see that. I'd love to see a collaboration there, because everybody benefits, don't they?
Okay. What about the creatives tax incentive? Have you considered, because that was AIM's, I believe AIM's request and the BPI's, that perhaps there should be a creative industries tax. Have you considered that?
All those sort of things we gather the evidence for, and then we hand them over to the Treasury and let them work out whether or not they feel that it would be a winner or not.
Okay, we do provide incentives for all sorts of things: film, animations, children's television, theatre, orchestras. All of that very welcome. Commercial music seems to be the exception. Why is that?
I suppose because commercial music has always been such a great British success story, but clearly the plight of so many musicians now that live music isn't an option has definitely brought a lot of things into question.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giles. I know that Minister Solloway has to go in about 6 minutes, but I know that, Caroline, you can stay for a little bit longer. So I'm going to call Julie Ellett to put her questions. Julie.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Caroline. It's great to have you both here. It's been interesting listening this afternoon and listening over the past few weeks. The three main record companies I've described as operating a bit like a cartel because of the way they control the lack of transparency. A lot of the things we've been hearing about, and Caroline, you've mentioned the CMA 3 times this afternoon, evidence. Would you be open to an investigation? Would you support an investigation by the CMA into all of this? And longer term, perhaps the creation of an adjudicator or ombudsman to protect our wonderful world-class music industry. What are your views on that, Caroline?
Hi, Julie. Well, I think I said already, the CMA is operationally independent, so we don't get to choose what they look at.
No, but would you support it? Would you support it looking into this?
Yes, of course.
There's clearly a problem here, isn't there?
Well, I'm very happy for the CMA to have a look at this. Yeah.
And much of the costs associated with recording music come from the artist's royalties. Do you think there's an that it's equitable when labels take the lion's share of your revenues, claiming they're taking a risk in the process?
Again, Julie, you're tempting me to make a judgment on what's fair and what's not fair when the music industry itself is just so hugely divided on this. I suppose in answer to this question and so many others that you've asked me today, I would just love to see the music sector more broadly coming around a table and working out what they think is fair, rather than they're expecting to be some sort of government decision or government mandate on this, because that's not how it works.
But it's an industry of people who don't have they're not equals in the industry.
No, but I don't.
There
I can't think of many other, and you guys can correct me if you have evidence to the contrary, but I can't think of many other industries that the government would intervene with to this sort of extent, unless there was really sort of compelling evidence, almost sort of market failure, that would encourage them to have to do so.
But it is almost market failure, and it's not transparent, so none of us can get to the bottom. And the evidence we've heard today is like some of the evidence we've heard in every session of this inquiry, that things are not transparent. So it's very difficult for us to get numbers to actually see what is really happening. But I'll move on. The Musicians Union have said every other area of business writes off after 6 years, but not the record labels. Why do you think that is, and do you think there's the disparity between the music industry and other industries?
Sorry, Julie, you cut out then. Can you just ask that question again, please?
Yeah, so the Musicians Union have said that every other area of business writes off debts after 6 years, but the music industry doesn't. The record labels don't. Why do you think that is, and do you think it's fair that there's this disparity?
I'm going to have to, excuse me, I'm going to have to pass on that question, and you might have to speak to Bays, or I don't know if Robert has a view, but it would strike me as a more of a business issue.
And
Amanda?
Yes, so I say apologies. I do have to go now, as the chair explained, but Tim is staying for half an hour extra. I think from my point of view, I just wanted to just come back to a couple of points that you mentioned though, Julie, that again, just to reiterate how important this inquiry is. And I think there is, from what I've certainly, I know you've had lots of evidence sessions. Clearly, I've been listening to the evidence sessions as well. And I think there is an element that we must make sure that we address around the transparency, but that is around the contracts that exist. And that would not be for government to comment on. And I think, I look very, very interested at your findings. Tim, I am going to pass it over to you. Apologies that I have to go, but it was an agreement that we had in advance. So many apologies.
No, it's fine, Amanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would Tim or Robert like to comment on what I've asked there? The writing off of debt.
That's not something
you had a comment.
Julie, thank you for the question. I don't think it's something that I can comment on. It's not linked to the sort of the intellectual property regime or copyright in terms of writing off the debt. So
thank you, Tim. Robert?
I'm afraid I don't have a huge amount of detailed understanding of this particular aspect. I would, to hazard a guess, I would imagine it's related to the ability of record labels to exploit, and I mean that in a positive way, exploit content over a long period of time in order to maximise the success and return on investment that the label has put into that particular content. But I'm saying that as an informed supposition rather than based on any detailed research that I've done.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Final question, Carol. I'm just going to do a slight segue because you've mentioned about how effectively the economics of the music system are broken right now because of no live performance. That is often something which artists rely on in order to make, not just to make ends meet, but to make a decent living. And I think we all feel for them in that respect. Now, but even post-COVID, as you know, as we've mentioned to you before, and as you came in front of us, there is an issue in terms of touring Europe and about access to these markets, cabotage, etc., etc. I just wonder whether, just to be clear for the committee, who's going to take this forward? Who is going to be sitting with the Spanish and the Italian governments and the Greek governments? Will it be a DCMS official? Will it be Lord Frost? Will it be Foreign Office, say, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State, Wendy Morton, whose minister, I believe, is for the European neighbourhood, whatever that is. So who is actually going to be sat at that table, and who is it that basically you're feeding into now in terms of the wants and the asks of the DCMS sectors?
Okay, so there's stuff that I can talk about now, and then there's stuff that we're going to have to come back to you on in just a little while, because there are things that are happening across government that are just sort of still being decided upon. But what I can talk to you about now is the fact that, yeah, I've met with Wendy Morton, and we've discussed an approach to how we want to work with the heads of mission across the EU to start talking with their counterparts to work out how we can make the whole process much smoother, much easier, and help trying to address the issue so that touring in Europe can resume with as much ease as possible as soon as it's safe to do so. But more broadly, this came up as a cross-government meeting last Friday. This was the subject of a cross-government meeting, and so it's being looked at by a number of different government departments, because we really do want to make sure that this isn't just a DCMS issue. It affects everybody. It affects the economy. It affects this sort of whole issue of the EU exit. And of course, it affects all our sort of international, our relationships internationally. So obviously there's a role for not only SCDO, but DIT here too. So we do want to make sure that every government department is playing their part. Clearly, with regard to the cabotage issue, the Department of Transport are involved as well.
Yeah, just to be clear then, what's happening is that you, Department of Transport, DIT, etc., are feeding into the Foreign Office, and then the Foreign Office are then going to instruct their heads of mission to do the negotiation with the individual states themselves. Is that just a first stage?
So what I'll do, if I can, Julian, is I will come back to you and just set this out really clearly when I'm allowed to, when I'm permitted to, because it's all being drawn up at the moment. But it's not
decided yet. It's not decided.
It has been decided, but I don't think it's been said publicly, and I probably will have my knuckles wrapped if I start talking about it here. Well, so yeah, I mean there is a plan, and that plan works on a number of fronts, and one of those fronts will be working with heads of mission across the EU to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that the whole system, the ease of touring, is as straightforward as possible. But we'll send you more information as soon as we're allowed to.
When do you think you'll be able to do that?
As soon as possible. I mean, literally imminently.
Right. Okay. Because obviously I'm not giving any clues away. There's a liaison committee on Wednesday, as you well know. And it would be good to know precisely before that committee, and we have the Prime Minister in front of us, exactly where the chain of command effectively is, who it is who's going to do the asking, who it is who's effectively writing the menu. And I know you're part of writing the menu, and I wouldn't expect DCMS ministers to go jetting around Europe doing individual. We know that wouldn't happen. But I'm just really intrigued. Yes, exactly. Although you'd have to stay in a hotel 14 days, wouldn't you? But the thing is, though, I'm really interested to know precisely where the stages are and who's doing the asking. So if you would contact the committee back on that as soon as possible, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be evasive. There is a plan, and we will articulate that plan to you as quickly as we can. But I don't know at what stage that will be published. But certainly the activity around this is happening already and happening straight away. So
well, the clock's ticking.
I understand we have a very small window of opportunity here before organisations, bands are able to start touring again. And we want to make sure we grab that opportunity and make as much progress as we can in that gap.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for your answers today. And also, in your absence, thank you to Amanda de Solloway and Robert Specterman-Green and Tim Moss for your evidence. That concludes our session. Order.
That now concludes all of the oral evidence from these sessions, and we await the report. And I'll post an update when I hear one. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers now. Bye-bye.